President Trump says only a few points of disagreement remain on a possible deal to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. But the Kremlin this morning is watering down any expectations that a deal is close. Earlier, CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and host of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, gave an update on the state of negotiations.
Look, this is head-snapping diplomacy. Yeah. I've really, truly never seen anything like this. You had Zelensky himself saying just yesterday, I'm ready to go talk to President Trump. I'm ready to travel. Plans were being made here in Washington and in Mar-a-Lago for any kind of interaction if they were set to go. And then President Trump posted on social media, not ready to meet with Zelensky yet. So that Thanksgiving deadline has disappeared. And we know that there is sort of just an invitation to keep moving these trains along on these parallel tracks. But I can't emphasize enough here how unusual it is to have the diplomats uninvolved with diplomacy. That's not who's negotiating. You have on the U.S. side the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, very close to Vice President Vance, talking to the Ukrainians about security guarantees. He's not a diplomat. You have Steve Witkoff, who just recently started in diplomacy after being a longtime Trump friend and work in real estate, and Jared Kushner, who doesn't even work for the United States government right now, are working on the Russian end of things. So this is really unusual. So if you're confused by the back and forth, imagine what the professionals are who've trained to be doing this, because they are just very much trying to understand what is happening inside the Trump inner circle with these efforts.
All right, for more on the efforts to bring an end to the war in Ukraine, I'm joined by CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. Liz, good to see you. So have we heard anything from the Russian side this morning?
Yes, we have a sort of technical response from the Kremlin, just confirming that Steve Witkoff is expected to be in Moscow next Monday, and that he's expected to meet with Vladimir Putin. But when confronted with the suggestion that the two sides have never been closer to a deal, Russia and Ukraine, the very well-known spokesman for President Putin, Dmitry Peskov, said, "Not so fast," in effect. He said, wait, this is all very premature. So a little bit of cold water, nevertheless, solid signs of progress. And to pick up on Margaret's point there that the seasoned diplomats are not at the center of things, that goes for the Russian side, too. And very interestingly, the man who appears to have been steering this deal inside the Russian inner circle, Mr. Dmitriev, is the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund. So he, too, he's a money manager. He was Harvard educated. He worked for Goldman Sachs. So he falls solidly in the business camp, and certainly not with a huge amount of diplomatic experience at this level at all.
Yeah, really interesting. And of course, that leaked audio tape, of course, of Witkoff talking to the Russians about how to get this deal over the finish line. Liz, what's the reaction to that? What are you hearing?
Oh, pretty testy. They're not happy. They've called it, they've said it amounts to hybrid warfare. They insist that they didn't leak it. They say it's come from presumably the American side. Pretty frosty. But no suggestion that it's going to stop the real hard work of diplomacy, which kind of goes to the next level on Monday when Mr. Witkoff gets to Moscow.
Yeah, all right, and I know we'll be tracking that. Elizabeth Palmer for us. Liz, thank you very much, friend. Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right, speaking to our Nancy Cordes aboard Air Force One last night, the president insisted the peace deal he's pushing will be fair to both sides. Listen.
What kinds of concessions are the Russians going to have to make?
They're making concessions. Their big concession is they stop fighting and they don't take any more land.
All right, so let's get a view from Ukraine, and for that, I'm joined by Aidan Stretch. He's a writer with the Free Press, currently living in Ukraine, and we should, of course, note that the Free Press and CBS News are owned by Paramount Skydance. Aidan, thanks so much for joining us. So let's talk about how the Ukrainians feel about this proposed deal. Earlier in the week, when the plan seemed to heavily favor the Russian side, President Zelensky had made sort of suggested that it was not being fair to Ukraine. They've retooled it since. How are Ukrainians feeling about the plan today?
Week and weekend here in Kyiv, but the Ukrainian officials that I've spoken to really have their eye on one element of the original 28-point plan, which is the idea that Ukraine would be forced to concede territory that its military currently controls without credible security guarantees in return. The negotiations that you just mentioned that have been ongoing throughout the week have apparently, we've received reports that Ukrainian and American officials have reached a loose framework, but the idea of these territorial concessions has not been agreed upon. And so as long as that's the case, I think there are real doubts here that this is a meaningful peace process here in Ukraine.
Yeah, and you wrote a really fascinating article for the Free Press. And one of the things that I saw over the course of the last couple of days is ordinary Ukrainians talking to reporters on camera about how they would feel if the Russians were allowed to keep some of those territorial gains, which, let's remind our viewers, came because of aggression. In other words, the Russians invaded Ukraine and were able to seize this territory. The question that I have for you is, as you are living there and you are in Kyiv, okay, and that is exactly what happens when we're trying to do a report from a country that is currently facing. Do we still have Aidan? Okay, Aidan, we just lost your image, but oh, there you are. Okay, cool. All right, so give us a sense of the mood amongst ordinary Ukrainians as this conflict approaches its fourth year. One of the things that I saw, and it was really heartbreaking, an older woman saying that if Zelensky were to accept this deal with those territorial concessions given to Vladimir Putin, it would be as if those people who died in Ukraine died for nothing.
I had a conversation yesterday with a Ukrainian soldier who's been fighting on the front lines of this war, not since 2022, but since 2014. And he said it would feel almost like treason. It would feel heartbreaking to have watched all of his counterparts there on the front line have died in vain for territory that they would then concede. And so the grandmother that you're referencing is certainly not alone there. And I think there are both real doubts here in Ukraine about whether Russia is earnestly suing for peace. I mean, of course, this week there was a massive attack on Kyiv in terms of drones and missiles, and over 7 people died. And so there is real doubt, I think, that among Ukrainians that Russia is suing for peace. And they're certainly not willing to forgo any military gains that they've taken over the last 3.5 years.
And Aidan, before you go, I also am curious if you've spoken to people about the possibility, or perhaps not, of Ukraine joining NATO at some point in the future. That seems to be a very, very big deal breaker for Vladimir Putin. Do you get the sense that Ukrainians would like to join NATO? And if that were not to be the case, if part of this peace deal suggested that they could not join NATO, how would people feel about that?
The idea is that Ukraine cannot withdraw from territory that it currently controls without credible security guarantees. They want credible security guarantees. Of course, the most credible would be joining NATO. So that's certainly something that Ukrainian officials have top of mind.
All right. So good to have you, Aidan Stretch, reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine, a writer for the Free Press. We really appreciate you. Stay safe and happy Thanksgiving. I know you're going to be on the road. It's always hard when you're on the road. Miss your family and friends, but wishing you a wonderful Thanksgiving wherever you end up.